students who may take on the faculty and force the faculty to go beyond what they used to teach in the past. In closing, let me assure you that there's nothing that has made the educational system at Berkeley as good as it is if it wasn't for the diverse population we have here. If you would come back, if you could come back and see what was being taught in Berkeley in the 1960s and 70s versus what's being taught today, there's major differences. If you look at the people that are graduating from here, just statistical, you find out that we're graduating more students today than we were in 1951. Our students are very successful, they're much better prepared, and I think the educational system will lose much if we move away from affirmative action, if we forget that diversity is not just a myth as far as providing quality education, that diversity is essential to providing quality education. Thank you very much.
Next we have Professor Pedro Noguera, and I don't need to tell you much about Pedro. He's here from Berkeley, he's the anti-apartheid movement, and continue to be active in forming the UC Berkeley Affirmative Action Coalition. So Pedro.
Good morning. I want to say first that I'm happy to be here with you this morning to participate in this conference and hopefully to get some organizing happening here at Berkeley. And I think the fact that this is such a small group today should be a challenge to all of us, that we need to do a lot of work here. People take Berkeley for granted. They say Berkeley is a radical place, it's a progressive campus. Berkeley should certainly be the leadership on this issue. Well, guess what? Look around you. We're not the leader on this issue. In fact, I think there's a lot more happening at UCLA. I would encourage you to talk to the people right there at that table. They can tell you about some of the organizing they're doing on that campus. It's, I think if you thought the NCAs look good, UCLA is looking real good on this issue right now. And there's a lot happening in some of the CSUs. But UC Berkeley, you know, I think that what Ed said, a lot of people are complacent here. I think a lot of people say, I'm smart, I don't really need affirmative action. You know, I got in because I was smart, and let other smart people get in too. And, or they'll say, you know, who knows what they say to rationalize why they're not involved. But basically, there's not a lot of involvement here. And I think some of it has to do with complacency and the fact that people think they're, you know, are trying to take care of their own education. But some of it has to do with also with the fact that not everybody sees this issue the same way. And sees it as affirmative action as something that needs to be preserved. So there's a lot of education work that needs to go on here. We're lucky because this ballot measure doesn't come up until the fall of '96. That gives us some time, but it's time to get started. Because we'll find ourselves in the same situation we were with Prop 187. We're waiting for the last few weeks before the election, trying to explain to people why this would be a bad change for the state, and be on the losing end. I was in a debate last Friday with one of the proponents of this initiative, Tom Wood, and one of the things that struck me about him throughout the debate was his calm sense of smugness, his arrogance. And it didn't come from the fact that he was so clever in the debate and presenting such arguments that were so convincing and evidence that was really serving as proof that this is a terrible thing, this is affirmative action. It didn't come from that. What it came from is his strong sense of winning. That the fact that even if he loses the debate, once it gets out there into the political arena, once the average person gets to hear the issue and the way they're going to present it to them, he's going to win. And we're on the losing end. And the fact is, I think he's right. He's right. Now, I think we can change that, but right now he is right. Because let's look at how they present the issue. The issue as they present it is, first of all, the Civil Rights Initiative. Who's against civil rights? Sign me up. And then what they say they're against, and what they want to do is to eliminate racial preferences. Simple, it's very straightforward now. They're not asking a whole lot of complicated things. They want to eliminate preferences on the basis of race and gender. Well, most of us want to do that too. So why not support something that wants to eliminate race and gender as a preference? Especially since most of us have been the victims of those kinds of preferences all our lives, and with a long history of that having been the practice. So we need to recognize, first of all, how the issue is being presented and why, in many ways, the polls look as they do right now. Because what the polls say is the only constituency in the state that comes out consistently against this initiative are women of color. Women of color are the only group. Everybody else is confused and split. With the exception of white males. They're pretty clear on this one, too. So I think that there's a lot of work to be done. If we're against racial preferences, why are we against this initiative? Well, a lot of that has to do with because we don't believe that discrimination is no longer an issue in our society. We don't believe that discrimination is gone. Now, I believe that, and I know that because of my everyday life, because I encounter discrimination on an everyday basis. But if you're a white person in America, you might believe that that's in fact true. In fact, I know some people of color who believe, really, it's Ward Connolly, listen to him. I heard him on McNeil Laird. He said racial discrimination really isn't a part of life in America for most of them. Sure, there's some skinheads out there, some Klansmen, but they're off on the margins. That's not everybody. Look at Al Campanis or Jimmy the Greek. They lost their job. Lost their job for saying something racially offensive. Isn't that proof that as a society we have embraced non-discrimination as a new ethic? Isn't that proof? Even David Duke does not sound like George Wallace sounded 25 years ago, and even George Wallace doesn't sound like George Wallace sounded 25 years ago. So we need to recognize that when we talk about racism in America in 1995, it's very different than talking about it in 1965 or 1955. If we don't understand that, we're going to lose. We're going to lose because if we talk about, say, well, there's rampant racism in America, and that's why we need affirmative action, they're going to say, well, damn, these people are just living in another dream world. Because as they see it, lots of icons in our society are people of color. They talk about Colin Powell for president. They said Republicans, all the Democrats would want him. Race clearly is not a problem with Colin Powell. They talk about Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan, who doesn't want to be like Mike? Michael Jordan, uniformly embraced by American people. George Foreman. Mike Tyson, okay, not Mike Tyson. But let's face it, in our society there are clearly examples of people of color who have managed to rise above race, who have been embraced, who hold positions of importance and influence, who are admired and respected across racial lines. All of which I think serves to create the impression that racism isn't an issue anymore. And that's true. That is true. If you look, there are more people of color who are in the professions, who teach on this campus, who are in politics, maybe not in business, but in politics, than ever before. Now, much of that is due to affirmative action, but not everybody understands that. I think if we don't understand racial dynamics right now in the country, we're going to lose. Because we have to also explain the fact that, yes, it's true that there has been progress. Because if we don't also acknowledge progress, we'll be denying our struggle. We're denying that our struggle has had any effect. Because the struggle for civil rights has had an effect on changing this country. So yes, it has. There has been a change. At the same time, we also know that there are many, many changes that haven't taken place yet. That is that even with the Brown decision being over 40 years old now, you can still find segregated schools throughout this country. And what's interesting about that is there are more segregated schools in the North and in the West than there are in the South now. And not only is it segregated on the basis of race, but segregated on the basis of class. That's despite civil rights legislation, that's despite a long history of legal precedent saying that segregation is illegal. We know that today, this country, on the basis of residence, is more segregated on the basis of race than it was 20 years ago. That if you look at housing patterns across the country, there's greater degree of segregation on the basis of race, not just class, on race now than there was 20 years ago. All demographers would say that's true, and it's increasing. How do we explain that in a period of civil rights, when there are no longer signs up saying so-and-so can't live here, or so-and-so can't get a job here? And that's because racial preferences operate in lots of different ways. They don't just operate when we say, no so-and-sos need apply. They can operate without the sign. Because they operate when the hiring decisions are being made, they operate when decisions about mortgages are being made, they operate on lots of different levels throughout a society. When people decide what school they're going to send their children to, racial preferences come into effect. But there's an unwillingness in our society to confront that, because to be a racist in America today is that's bad taste. So people want to deny racism. They want to deny the existence of racial preferences, which makes it hard to have an honest conversation about this. We know in the back of many people's minds that when you talk about crime, black images come into their mind. When you talk about drugs, when you talk about prisons, that this race is associated with these issues. But there's an unwillingness to confront race and the reality of race in America, which is one of the reasons why people want to pretend that we live in a colorblind society. We have to be able to deal with that. If we can't deal with that and we can't cut through the blindness, because I think there is color blindness. There's an unwillingness to face color in our society, the unwillingness to face racial realities in society, which creates a kind of color blindedness. There's also blindness to poverty. But we have to confront that as we engage one another. What do? We have over a year to organize. Over a year to organize, over a year to talk. I think we have to start here, talking to one another, right? Getting ourselves organized, convincing people this is a good thing, this is an important issue, not just a good fight to say that we fought, but an important issue to win on. A very important issue to win on. That was, we need to not just look good in the election come November 96th, we need to win this one. Because the consequences are going to be real. Not only for the next generation of high school students who can't get it, because what they'll tell you, the advocates of this position will say, well, the students who are going to UC Berkeley will go to Santa Cruz. And those who go to Santa Cruz will go to CSUs. And those who are at the CSUs now will be bumped out, but they'll go to the community colleges. And what about those with community colleges? Oh, well, in time, there will be a place for them too, if they work hard. The consequences of this going into effect will be immediate and have immediate impact on people of color throughout the state. It's projected that if this passes, that the African American student population will go down to about 1% of the campus, of the undergraduate student body, and Latinos will be about 3%, Chicanos. That will be the immediate impact that the admissions office projects if this goes into effect. I think beyond that, what it also does is send out another message. It sends out a message that our society, that what Willie Brown talked about, that the backlash is in effect. That America is now completely forgotten about race, about civil rights. That's a thing of the past. Okay? And what that means is, they can only say that, but at the same time, there's also an understanding that racial issues are still out there. Okay? Because that's what Prop 187 was about. That's what the Three Strikes Initiative was about. And what it means is that as a society, instead of trying to find ways to enable people to feel as though they're a part of this society, that they have a way out through legitimate channels, namely education, working hard, that it might pay off for you. The message would be the opposite one. That even if you work hard, if you are of a particular race, and if you live in a certain area where there's not a lot of opportunity, your chances are going to be very, very limited. And what happens when people start to recognize that, and there are also a lot of people already who already recognize that, is resentment grows. And the polarization and the conflict and the anger that we see in our society increases. So to win this is important, not just for those who might benefit, because I think lots of us benefit in lots of different ways that we may not recognize because of the existence of affirmative action. And I think we need to send that message out there. Because right now, I think we're operating in a deficit position on this issue because of the ways in which this issue of race is obscured in our society and racial privilege. The people who are most privileged are the ones least likely to recognize it, least likely to understand and to appreciate how privilege has benefited them. Every year, I ask my students in my class, and I'll stop with this, to talk about their experience being tracked in school after I explain what tracking is. And what I find consistently is that the students who were gifted, labeled gifted, who went through advanced placement classes, who went to the best schools, the best private schools especially, have no recollection of ever having this happen to them. It all seems so natural. In fact, they keep arguing this. I wasn't tracked. I went to the best schools. I was gifted, but I didn't see that as tracking. And then I talked to my other students who were put into special ed classes because they couldn't speak English, or who were labeled as at risk and emotionally disturbed, and who had to fight to get out of special education classes. They have a very vivid memory of being trapped and of fighting against being channeled and being denied opportunity in our schools. But privilege is disguised a lot of times. It seems so natural. And I think we need to get at that. Because if we can't get at that, we can't get people to understand the way privilege works, we can't get them to then empathize with those who don't have it.
Next we have Elizabeth Martinez. She's an author and a writer, author of 500 Years of Chicano History. She writes for Z Magazine, and she is a continued activist that we meet quite often in the streets more than any other place in terms of demonstrations and action. So Elizabeth Martinez.
Hey, that's a really great speech to follow, right? And good morning, buenos dias. I have to just preface my talk today by a comment based on the latest news from Oklahoma City about the suspects, which is, you know, maybe this time the angry white male has gone too far. If you don't know, I'm referring to the fact that they're looking for two white guys who rented what they think is the truck in which the bomb was placed. So, in the light of that, however, we also see a wave of anti-terrorist legislation being presented in Congress today, which to a large extent is anti-immigrant laws that are coming up. And I think in terms of what Pedro was saying about racism and its new faces, anti-immigrant is a great deal of that. So, in Oxnard, California, which is in the south, right, there is a Nabisco plant. Nabisco is this huge food products company that produces steak sauce, hot sauces, and all the world's supply of Grey Poupon mustard, which I always thought came from France. But no, there's a bunch of Mexican women down there, and Chicanas grinding these things out. They recently filed a suit because they are forced to go to work wearing diapers because they are not allowed to take restroom breaks when they need to. If they do take those breaks, they are disciplined, suspended, or sent home without pay. These women are on the assembly line, so this is a problem of losing who knows how many dollars, right, if they take 2 minutes off the assembly line. The men workers have different kinds of jobs and don't have this problem. In any case, the California Rural Legal Assistance people just filed a suit for them. It's the second suit filed on the behalf of these women who were, by the way, told to urinate in their clothes if they had a problem. So instead of that, they started going to work in diapers. The idea of having to go to work in diapers because you can't go to the restroom seems to be about as degrading as you can get. And I think it's important to see here, we're talking about women of color, Chicanas in particular. Nabisco's abuse is certainly not new. I can't relate it directly to the attack on affirmative action, but I think that it points to the multifaceted nature of the attacks that are going on today, whether it's the attack on affirmative action, pushing Prop 187, and by the way, there's a whole lot more laws out there that are anti-immigrant laws. You can't get a GED, by the way, if you don't have the right piece of paper. All that kind of thing is happening, the attacks on women's rights and so forth. I think they're all very connected, and we need to see the linkage. And seeing the linkage, I think, is part of the fight back that I want to talk about a little bit. This multifaceted assault is sustained by a heavy-duty ideological assault. And that's what I wanted to speak about today. I think there's a battle for people's minds going on right here and other places, and there is what I would call a war for California's identity going on. So the groundwork for this goes back quite a ways. The groundwork for what I'm calling this war on California's identity and this whole right-wing assault. It goes back to at least 1976, to that grandfather of all angry white males, Alan Bakke, who won a suit in the Supreme Court proving reverse discrimination when he, as a white man, didn't get into UC Davis Medical School. But there's all other aspects to it. The attack has gone on, and it's attack basically on the gains, small as they were, but they were real, of the 60s movements, which include, of course, affirmative action, as well as ethnic studies and gains of the gay liberation movement, women's movements, and so forth. Let me just mention a few of the aspects of this groundwork for today's ideological assault that I'm talking about. One of them, and it's really clear if you watch TV or movies and stuff, is trashing the 60s. So there's two stereotypes of the 60s out there. One of them is it's all these hippy-dippy people listening to the Grateful Dead, wearing tie-dye shirts, turning on, doping out, turning on and tuning out of the society, and tripping in all kinds of ways, which have nothing to do with any sort of collective desire for social justice. The other image is like the opposite end, which is a bunch of mad kids running around making bombs in Greenwich Village, being totally destructive. Nobody could possibly relate to them. You couldn't possibly see anything, most people, in either of those images that you would want to relate to. Thanks. That's my prime ideological warfare clipping of the day. I'll get to that. So that the idealism, the demand for social justice, the moral authority that was attached to the fight against racism in the 60s by many people is wasted, right? Is negated by the current way that the 60s are being projected in the media and everywhere else you look. So that there's just nothing about it that was any good. Any sort of societal idealism in particular is just kind of not cool. A second form in which I think we've seen this ideological assault being built up is undoing the Vietnam syndrome. And by that I mean there have been some steps taken, movies like one on the 4th of July, Oliver Stone's other movies, and other ways, books and so on, in which a doubt was planted somewhere in the psyche of this country about that war being a good war. People sort of began to think maybe it wasn't such a good thing. Maybe people died, oh my goodness, in vain, no way. And that had to be undone for the sake of preserving a militaristic society whose imperial control was justified. And I think, and I hope this isn't stretching it, I personally think that one of the purposes, or at least one of the effects of the Gulf War was to undo this sort of syndrome and to restore the greater glories of American militarism in a quick old war, not a whole lot of body bags, right? But let's see what a great power this country is again. This is a really hot issue, as I think the recent current furor over George McNamara's book, in which he says, as former Secretary of Defense, hey, I was wrong to push this war, I made a horrible mistake, a whole lot of people got killed. Whoa, nobody likes this book. Nobody. The book reviewers don't like it, the veterans organizations don't like it, nobody wants to hear this. I don't mean to glorify the man, after all, he did do what he did, and it was bad. But he's saying some truths, and people don't want to hear them. A third sort of pillar of this groundwork for the ideological assault that's going on now is, I think, trashing feminism. The F word is out. I know a lot of objectively feminist women, particularly young women, teenagers and a little older. They're objectively feminists, but they don't want that word put on them. No way. That is a bad word. That word has been, sort of trashed out of recognition. Again, by a whole assault that started out kind of crudely with making us into bra burners and man-haters, right? But it's gone on in other more complicated ways. And I think it's also, in part of undoing the gains and undoing the mentality of the 60s. There's also a very general concept that's part of this assault, which is undoing the idea that the state has responsibility for the general welfare, that, there's something called justice and really no attention should be paid to that, and that the government maybe should solve some problems, have some welfare programs, have a safety net, and all that stuff. That has really been steadily replaced by the notion of nothing but individual responsibility. Okay. George Bush's slogan about the 1,000 points of light, I think really was a celebration of individual responsibility and a negation of the idea that social justice should be some kind of concern of the state. So here we are, we're all little 1,000 points of light, so all of us here frantically trying to deal with the problems of poverty, right, mass suffering, with the fact that, according to a report out a few days ago, the United States stands number one among industrialized nations in the gap between rich and poor. The most unequal society of all industrial nations. But we're supposed to somehow solve that problem by our little selves, by really getting in there and working hard. So I'm not denying the concept of individuals as people with strengths and weaknesses that we can make the most of, but it's a whole campaign to negate any sense of a society having collective responsibility of the interrelationships between all human beings and between all forms of life, including the planet, including the environment. That's not real. That's not something to worry about. Or else you can go around and, recycle your newspapers. That'll take care of that, right? Just be sure to put out your cans of your newspapers, and don't worry about the fact that they're undoing all the regulations to protect the environment. It's really, if you don't put out your cans in your newspapers, there, hey Jason, you're in trouble. It's our fault. So I think that this has laid the groundwork for the assault today, which takes particular forms, starting with the scapegoating of everybody, people of color, youth, women. We're all responsible for the economic crisis that you know only too well about. And it's continuous. It comes at us in all sorts of forms. This clipping is just the latest. There's a new book called Alien Nation. Alien Nation. Hey, guess what? I'm an alien. But anyway, Alien Nation is a book saying that why immigration is so bad, it has to be stopped. It gets a big review in the New York Times by their new book reviewer, who, by the way, is a right-wing voice, if there ever was one. But it's telling us that immigrants are a problem, and it includes the argument that those who are going to suffer most from immigration are the African American communities. So that divide and conquer strategy is included, and it's part of the whole assault. Behind this, and some of the reasons that are obvious that I mentioned, I think is this assault on the identity problem, is the feeling that the white republic's days are numbered. And one of the main reasons for that is, of course, the reality of changing demographics. In this respect, and others, I think California is the cutting edge and often has been. And I see what's happening here as what may be sweeping the country within the next 25 years. Because here we have a state which, within a few decades, is going to be a majority of people of color, which is already that in San Francisco, Los Angeles, and certain counties in Southern California. And that's real, and I think there's going to be more of it. And it has launched a wave of fear and hostility among those who identify with the white republic dominance, and they are mostly Anglos, but not only. A feeling of being under siege, threatened by cultures that are unfamiliar to them. Now, just to be cool about this, there are, of course, some contradictions, and they mostly come from the corporate elite, who've caught on to the fact that there's a market out there, and it's getting more colorful. Bank of America has had bilingual ATMs for quite a while now, Spanish, English. They send their executives off to sensitivity training sessions in the South, so they will learn about racism and how to treat black people and other people of color. They won't be nasty anymore. But this is all for the greater glory of the Bank of America, right? Nevertheless, it's another piece of the picture, and they use it sometimes. They use it to tell us, that things are not so bad after all. So, what is there on the bright side? What is there on the bright side? I think that we can see a number of things that need to be done, and a number of people that are setting examples. And among the examples set, I have found junior high and high school students particularly young women, and particularly those I know the most who are Latinos and Latinas in Northern California, to have set a real example in the last couple of years, since spring of 1993, with their militant walkouts called blowouts, involving thousands and thousands of students from dozens of schools over time. Not to leave out the massive protest, the incredible protest of 10,000 students in Los Angeles connected with this campaign against 187. And I mention them in particular. I think they really sort of cut through to a lot of the basic issues. There's a lot of women's leadership there, and they have a desire for unity that is very powerful. In fact, I've interviewed quite a few, and over again they say their dream for society is unity. And they're not just talking about between gangs, they're talking about society as a whole. I think they have showed us, by their example, at their best, I'm sure they have problems too, at their best, some of the things that we have to be working against. I'm talking about alliances among people who are under tag number 1. And I think, but also others who may or may not realize the damage that they face and that can be done to their society. Some of the things I think we have to watch out for and not be held back by are, sexism, homophobia, narrow nationalism, and among our own forces. I think also we cannot get into playing what a student I know calls the oppression Olympics. The oppression Olympics is when you go for the gold. It's the most oppressed category of human beings. This is just one more form of competitiveness that we can't afford. If ever there was a time not to get into this kind of rinky-dinky stuff, which often has a material base, I realize that, but it is now. I think we've got to be very honest among ourselves and be learning from each other, learning about common experiences, learning about what divides us and what unites us in a very intense way. I'd like to just close with a little sort of motto I've got from one of the student walkouts in San Francisco last year, which has to do with recognition of the importance of unity. There was this march going down Dolores Street, and I hear the kids all chanting, "Wilson, Wilson, a la chingada, viva, viva, Che Guevara." Those of you who don't know what chingada means, it's kind of like a 4-letter word that, anyway. So, or it could be translated to hell with, screw you, and other words like that, okay. So, I hear this one girl come up, we can't sing that, we can't chant that, we got to change that chant, because what about the kids from Wilson High? Wilson High School, right? They can't just be denouncing Wilson High. The kids are going to think that they're getting denounced, the kids from Wilson High. Oh, no, wait. So, in about 30 seconds, they had changed their chant. Pete Wilson a la chingada, viva, viva, Che Guevara. So that's a good one for all of us, don't you think? Thank you very much.
Next we have Anji Fa. She's part of the Civil Rights Coalition in San Francisco and working on no retreat on affirmative action. Anji Fa.
I want to talk about the nuts and bolts of how we can win the fight of our lives. And later on in this afternoon's session, workshop session number 1, Crystal Weston is going to be going more into depth into some of these strategies. But with Prop 187 and with the so-called Civil Rights Initiative, we are in the fight for our lives. Whether we win this next initiative or whether we lose, or how it is that we struggle, is going to determine the course of the rest of our lives. Whether we spend our futures trying to recover what we've lost, or whether we're able to make more advances that we need to make in order to make this a truly just society for all people of color, lesbians and gays, women. We are in grave danger of losing this crucial fight. President Clinton, our so-called Democratic president, came this close to coming out in favor of the so-called Civil Rights Initiative in his State of the Union address last January. It was only the efforts of people like Willie Brown and civil rights organizations throughout the country that held him back. And when Clinton came to California 2 weeks ago, he didn't want to talk about the issue of affirmative action. It was grassroots support, talking with the delegates, passing out leaflets, passing out buttons, passing out stickers, that forced Clinton to address the issue. And we did our work so well at the grassroots that the delegates at the convention adopted not the platform on affirmative action that the President of the U.S. asked them to, but they adopted a stand on affirmative action that the grassroots asked them to. Now that's a real important lesson there. It's a lesson that if you do your organizing right, if you talk with enough people at the grassroots, if you have enough time, you have a chance, if you're visible enough, of winning your fight. And students can play a key role in this victory. It's important that students from all the campuses are here today, over a year before this initiative is expected on the ballot. Social change happens when we set the campuses on fire, and then when students take that fire from the campuses and organize not only the campuses, but also go out to the communities. It's a real important lesson. Whether it was the civil rights movement of the 1960s or the anti-war movement. It was very important to set the campuses on fire, but then it was also crucial to go out into the communities and ask for help. And I want to talk about one strategy of how we build a winning base so that we can win the civil rights fight of our lives, and we can win all the other fights that we need to go on and wage in this state and in this country. We lost Proposition 187 by only a very small vote, actually. We only lost it 59% to 41%. And it's going to be not easy, but it's possible to shift 10% of the vote to a 51% majority for us. There are a number of ways we can do it. Here's one possible way of doing it. One possible way of doing it is increasing the number of votes in our communities of people of color through registration and getting out the vote. We have to win our vote in the Latino and Asian communities. Also, the African American community is key. African Americans voted against Proposition 187 by 53%. And we can expect a much higher vote against the so-called Civil Rights Initiative. And that differential, combined with an increase in the African American voter turnout, can probably give us another 2% of the statewide vote. If we increase the registration in Latino and Asian American communities and win that vote, that can give us another 2%. And then we win the rest of our victory by moving a portion of the white vote to our side. And this is probably going to require convincing white women to vote for affirmative action by appealing at a fundamental emotional level to what they already know, that women have a long way to go to achieve true equality. We can't be afraid of a gender gap. Bettina has talked about how it is that we're at war about California's identity. California's population is only 53% white, but the electorate is 81% white. And whether we like it or not, the right wing is placing this so-called Civil Rights Initiative on the ballot to exploit the racial anxiety of white voters. And it's also quite possible that the fundamentalist Christian part of the right wing is primarily concerned with getting women out of the workforce and back to the kitchen. And they're perfectly willing to exploit white racial anxiety if it will help them to win. What we need to do in order for us to win, for our futures, is to turn the initiative campaign into a crusade for race and gender justice in communities of people of color and among traditional white progressives. Our people must feel that they are part of something big and exciting, a resurgent civil rights movement. And that means we need to get together and seize the momentum and give people something concrete that they can do. A way of showing their support for affirmative action. A way of being able to talk with their neighbors and friends and family about affirmative action. A way of being able, as we did at the California Democratic Convention, of putting support for affirmative action out there. That this is something that when you talk about taking away, you're talking about taking away from me and my family and my community and my friends and people who care about this issue. We need a big, visible show of support for civil rights and affirmative action. And so what we propose to do is this. We propose that starting next month, we initiate a campaign to collect 1 million signatures of Californians who support affirmative action by November of 1995, a full year ahead of the election. And this 6-month campaign is going to be the biggest, we hope, grassroots campaign that this state has ever seen for affirmative action, for civil rights. It'll give us the chance to go neighborhood by neighborhood, store by store, parking lot by parking lot, classroom by classroom, and ask people to take a stand in support of educational opportunity and affirmative action. If they're with us, we'll have the chance to get their name and address and phone number a full year ahead of the election. We'll ask them to become involved in the campaign. We'll ask them to post signs in their windows, bumper stickers on their cars, wear buttons, and put messages on their answering machines, urging everyone to show their support for affirmative action. The campaign has a whole number of goals. It's going to build the kind of organized movement it will take to deliver a vote that we need, and a database of 1 million potential voters, contributors, and volunteers so that we can win this fight of our life and all the other fights that are going to come. We need also to build the infrastructure, the campus by campus, community by community, neighborhood by neighborhood, workplace by workplace network that it's going to take to win this fight for affirmative action and the next fight for civil rights, and so that we can go on the offensive again in our lifetimes, instead of building always and asking to recover what once was lost. The campaign does not stop there. In December of 1995, we can start our election field operation, and this is where we can really start to get serious about voter registration. We can start to do educational house meetings. We can do debates of all kinds. And then in August of 1996, we can make sure that we've got the kind of grassroots effort in every city and every neighborhood in this state. It's this scale of things that we need to talk about in order to win not only this initiative, but the rest of the initiative. I don't know about you, I'm getting tired of losing these initiatives. I'm getting tired of being on the defensive. I want to go on the offensive. And what it takes in order to go on the offensive and spend the rest of our lives organizing for new things instead of defending what another generation has already won for us is it takes long, hard work. It takes going out there, and it takes talking with people in supermarkets. It takes talking with people door to door. It takes asking students to give up their summer vacation to spend it fighting for civil rights, fighting for affirmative action. And it's going to take a big organized effort, because this is a big organized state. And we aren't necessarily going to have the kind of money that these campaigns are usually won with. They're usually won or lost on very narrow measures of TV ads or radio ads. People usually don't debate the issues on initiatives. This one is different. People feel very strongly about affirmative action, and we are going to have to engage every Californian about the issue of affirmative action. We are proposing that we do that from a base of strength, from 1 million Californians being out there and saying, a full year before the election, we are in support of affirmative action. If you're interested in these ideas, and we hope that students from throughout the state will come on board, again, Crystal will be talking about these ideas more in workshop session 1 on legal analysts, legislative strategies, and CCRI, and I urge you to attend. And those of you at different campuses interested in plugging in, please talk with Crystal. And we urge also the group as a whole to please join into this battle, because students going into the community to talk and organize and ask for help is a powerful force, and a force for change, and a force for moving us ahead. Thank you.
Next we have Professor Carlos Munoz. Between himself and Pedro, they have been the most consistent people here supporting the coalition effort and working with the UC Berkeley Affirmative Action Coalition in many events. So, Professor Carlos Munoz.
Buenas tardes. It's nice to see so many of us here today that have been working for a long time in the struggle, since the 1960s, of course, I'm talking about, not just recently. But also there's a lot of empty chairs, as we can see around us. That means that we have a very, very tough fight ahead of us. Because we're not just fighting Pete Wilson, Newt Gingrich, and otros pendejos, or other ilk. We're also fighting liberals on this issue. That's right. I was somewhat privileged to be at the Goldman Foundation Environmental Awards in San Francisco last week. If you know what that means, or what that is, it's a very progressive, white, progressive foundation that gives $75,000 award to grassroots community activists throughout the world that are making a difference from each continent of the world. This year, the North American award went to a Chicana, an 81-year-old Mexican-American woman from East Los Angeles. It also went to a Nigerian freedom fighter who right now, this very minute, is being tortured in the prisons of Nigeria by the military dictatorship. And I said to myself, it's wonderful to be here because it gives me that inspiration that I need to keep going, as I have been doing for the last 30 years of my life. But I talked to one person who sat next to me during the whole time, and he was telling me about his critique of Republicans and other people like that. But then I posed the issue of 187, the issue of affirmative action to him. And his response was as follows. Those damn immigrants, they're a problem. People of color, they want it all. And they don't even have the intelligence that prepares them for the kind of jobs they want. Cabrón. I said, yeah, that's what we're up against. You know. We're also up against another force that we didn't have to fight in the 60s, our own kind. Uncle Thomas on the Supreme Court is the most, visible one in some ways. And we also have people like Tom Sowell, although he was kind of around in the 60s, he hasn't become quite the celebrity he is now, thanks to that Hoover Institute down the road, that penis-looking institute, thing that goes up the tower, mantle of white male supremacy. But he was also has been joined now by the likes of Linda Chavez, a Chicana from New Mexico, former member of the Trotskyist Socialist Workers' Party, who is now, or became one of the Reagan's tokens in his cabinet. We're also joined by others, like the guy down in San Jose State, who, has a book out, the character of our, quoting Dr. King, Shelby Steele. And I just debated one black male recently on the issue of affirmative action, who is a Republican in Sacramento, who works with the legislative lobby there for Sacramento Republicans. And as I was debating him, I was tripping out on it. I said, my God, I didn't do this back in the 60s, having to debate a man of color about the issue that represents the struggle that we have been fighting for a long time. So we're up against it. We're up against it, which means that we cannot win the struggle unless we commit ourselves twice as much as my generation, committed itself back in the 60s. Because, as Angie has put it most eloquently, we're fighting for our lives this time. We were then, yes, too, but now we really, really are. The Civil Rights Initiative has to become the major issue, in my mind, not affirmative action. And now it sounds kind of contradictory, perhaps, because I'm one of those, as Hatem has mentioned, very actively involved on the issue of affirmative action. And I will continue to do so. But see, affirmative action is just one small part of a very large and larger struggle. The Civil Rights Initiative, and I debated Custer the other day. I was supposed to debate the Black Regent, ¿cómo se llama? Ward Connerly, but he canceled out on me. So they sent to Custer instead. And he said very simply, I'm not against affirmative action. I'm just against race. Using race as a category, you know, blah, blah. But then on the Rush Limbaugh show, he stated very clearly that the reason he thought of the CCRI was because he got sick and tired of seeing all the radicals of the 60s taking over the faculties of his institutions, the deanships, and seeing simultaneously the lowering of standards brought about by the cultural diversity of his campus. Ahí está la cosa. That's where it is, right there. The bottom line. The CCRI, anti-affirmative action, the anti-immigrant hysteria, 3 strikes you're out, are part and parcel of the right-wing counter-revolution that started with Reagan's presidency and continues today with Newt Gingrich's revolution in the Congress. We must keep that in mind as we organize and debate affirmative action. We need to put it in that larger context. We are in a very, very intense race and class and gender war in our society right this very second. We have our backs against the wall because, in fact, we don't control these institutions. We don't control a damn thing in this American empire of imperialism and racism and white male patriarchy and homophobia y toda esa cosa. That's why we must fight as we have never fought before. We must put once again our lives on the line, not just the slots in affirmative action at this institution, but our lives on the line, because that is what it has come to in this day and age as we get ready to enter the 21st century. We're not playing games. We're not marching out in the streets anymore just for the hell of it. We must not only demand what little we have in affirmative action, but we must demand something more beyond that. We must demand the fundamental restructuring of these institutions that will guarantee not only affirmative action slots, in quote, but very true equal opportunity for all people, including poor whites, including everyone that has been left out, not just us, people of color. We must organize as we are fighting CCRI, as we're fighting all these efforts on the campus and off campus. We must begin to organize a new civil rights movement, but not the old version, the 60s variety. That was a male-dominated movement. It was a black and white struggle largely. We must organize a civil rights movement that is truly a multiracial, multicultural movement and struggle. We must also, as we are organizing, begin to educate our own kind, our own communities, about homophobia, about other issues that are not quite legit to talk about. You know what I'm saying? Especially in my own community, the Latino community, that's very, very much of a struggle. But we have to tell these machos out there that, hey man, the world is larger than just, you know, the male pendejada, end quote. What I mean by that is the male, you know, stupidity that we have all around us that makes for the reality of battered women, that makes for the reality of rape in society. We must put a stop to that, as well as we will have to stop other things in our society. I can go on and on and on, but we have a wonderful set of speakers here. And I just want to say in conclusion that those of us here at this institution don't have the luxury that we never really had to simply be professors writing books for other professors, okay? Or simply be students concerned about getting that BA and certification necessary to make it, to become a success in the mainstream. We must go out of our way as we teach, as we learn, to put ideas into practice, to put into practice a counter-hegemonic politics in society that goes beyond Democrat and Republican, because we don't know it by now, we'll never know it, that the Democrats are gone. Okay, they're gone. Forget them. With all due respect to Willie, I didn't get a chance to hear him, okay? And I respect the man, he's done a hell of a lot. But the Democratic Party ain't gonna do a damn thing. They want to win the next election. They're talking about the poor white middle class. They're talking about getting that white male angry voter back. The hell with that. Let them have those people. Okay? Let us begin to act out a new vision of an American politics without borders, sin fronteras. An American politics that goes beyond the U.S. and connects America Latina, that connects Africa, that connects Asia, that connects all the people of the world together, because we are one in the final analysis. We must fight on that basis. Mother Earth deserves our loyalty, and she's the only one who deserves it. Muchas gracias. Venceremos. ¡Que viva la revolución!
Next, we have a person that is not a stranger to UC Berkeley, been part of the free speech movement here in Berkeley, one of its leaders, and currently is also active as part of Campus Coalition for Human Rights and Social Justice, which is a coalition that is trying to connect faculty from the CSU, UC system, as well as with students to begin organizing for human rights and social justice on campuses. So, Mario Savio.
Seems like I'm the only European representing our party, our continent. Okay. But we'll leave more of her. Would like to indicate something about how I got to be here. In other words, what the dues are I paid to get on the panel. It's important not for my benefit, but in terms of our understanding where we've been and where we may need to be again. Across the bay in San Francisco, my first arrest, there weren't a lot of them. I mean, there were people who were into collecting this, like, collecting coup. I just was arrested a few times. The first time was at the Sheraton Palace Hotel, And we called it then in those days, quaintly now, discriminatory hiring practices. Now, we didn't have the idea that you had to prove that the particular person who was seeking a job had actually himself been noticed sufficiently to be discriminated against. It was sufficient to take a look at who was working there. You know, you look at the front desk, if all the faces were white, discriminatory hiring practices. It was pretty clear to us. And so there were demonstrations. Those were, let me say, it was a massive campaign. And we shut down the hotel. Okay? I say we. I was a warm body. There was Tracy Sims, there was Mike Myerson, was it? I was a warm body. I was one of the people arrested. But there seemed to be no other way to do it. In those days, there was no institutionalization of affirmative action. Okay? That demonstration and many others like it was about affirmative action before it became such a major institutionalized program that now all the dominant people in the society are quaking in their boots because they're about to be thrust from the scene. We've been so successful. But in those days, we call it discriminatory hiring practices. We did shut the hotel down. It was actually glorious. I remember that I got there, of course, because I believed in the issues, and in part also because there was this girl I wanted to impress. You know, that was one of the things people did at a certain age, and still do. Let me say, we had in those days, there were coffee dates, there were library dates, study dates. Well, there were picket line dates. Okay? Now, I know that you do some of that today. Let me say, invoking a dead European male, okay? That is a tradition more honored in the observance. We ought to do more of it, in other words, okay? So please encourage your partner of whatever sort to join you on a picket line. It is definitely a tradition honored in the observance. Okay, I'm not going to ask you who I'm referring to. Okay. Now let me say something about the pattern. It started then in the streets. All right? Streets, broadly speaking, because we marched right into the hotel. There was no using that hotel, okay? It started in the streets. It went to the courts. It did. Some of us won, some of us lost. After a passage of many years, it's now an initiative. It is an initiative which really, it's a pity that George Orwell didn't live to see this, okay? This is newspeak, okay? This is the California Civil Rights Initiative, all right, CCRI. You really do have to keep that in mind. If at some point you lose sight of the issues, if at some point you don't feel not rage, but if you don't feel outraged, think of the name. Think of the name alone. The name is a lie. Problem is, if that initiative, that anti-civil rights initiative, passes, we'll be back to the streets. I remember how, okay, I know how to go limp. I know how to allow them to carry me away, how to impede the arrest procedure so that it takes as long as possible. My children are sufficiently along that I'm willing to do it again. I'm not eager to do it again. But if that's what it takes, that's what we'll have to do. And I say this as much for people outside this room who may read about it as for the people here. People have to understand what Pandora's box they are opening, how divisive this particular initiative is. All the graybeards are going to come back, and they're going to be joining hands with lots of younger people. It's going to be in the streets if we don't win at the ballot box. Guaranteed. I promise you. Guaranteed. guaranteed. Okay, it's not just affirmative action, significant as that is, and I want to say a good deal more about that. It's a whole range of issues. It's in fact a whole alternative way of seeing the world, as some of the signs I've seen in Berkeley so eloquently put it. It's newt wit, okay? Now the problem is, they can get people to vote their way on the basis of prejudice alone, on the basis of fear alone. The people who voted in this terrible set of propositions were mostly not bad people. They were people who were confused. They were confused by others who knew better, who had the advantage of money, and who propagandized it was a soundbite election. And they can do that again. They have the money. They can do that again. I repeat, if they succeed, then we will be strong in the streets. If we can't be strong at the ballot box, we will be strong in the streets. Let me say now a few things about, just a couple of things, and we'll come back. I like to wander around things, see them from different points of view. A few things about affirmative action, broadly speaking. As an institution, it is perhaps one generation old. I grant you, affirmative action policies are much older than that. What you've heard from previous speakers, what Willie Brown says, absolutely true. But as an established institution that everyone has to contend with every time, mind you, people submit applications for work, it's very much an institution, in that sense, only about a generation old. Now, ancestors from my continent established a special kind of racial and gender supremacy here that we've known and loved 300 years ago. Can one reasonably expect to have undone that in one generation? 30 years against 300? You see, you don't need a lot of facts. It's so preposterous. I think it was Voltaire who said, you know, if they can get you to believe absurdities, they can get you to commit atrocities. That's what it is. See, it's just so absurd on the face of it. There's no possibility that all of that evil, that poison in the society could be leached in one generation. No doing it. There will be a need for affirmative action long after this spirit has gone elsewhere, if there's elsewhere to go. It's going to be yet a number of generations, certainly, before that particular poison, those particular errors, deep errors, have been eliminated from this society. You can't undo those 300 years in 30. But they're telling us it's not just that all of that has been, whatever was legitimate in your complaints, it's not just that all that's been undone. So far has it been undone that any prolongation of those programs will only harm the poor, benighted white male. A bizarre idea when you look above the glass ceiling. Very bizarre idea. And if they can get people to believe that, then we are in serious trouble. And you see, they can organize with their great resources, their great material resources, simply on the basis of appeal to prejudice and fear. We, however, with much more limited material resources, actually have to help re-educate people. Organizing from our side requires moral re-education as much as anything else. It is very difficult to do, but not impossible. Now, I said there is a unity of issues. We saw it in the California elections, these last terrible elections. It wasn't just Proposition 187 scapegoating the most exploited people that don't even make the stack as far as citizenship is concerned, earning here when they do below minimum wage. Okay. Wasn't just that. Okay. The worst of the worst was Proposition 184. Proposition 184 is 3 strikes and you're out proposition. Doesn't mean 3 strikes of violent crime. Any felony will do. Any felony will do. And of course, in a society where the property is theft, right? This is our society, okay? In that society where property rules, naturally, lots of crimes against property, even minor ones, will do. Okay, what's going to happen? Right now, as I think Percy said, we are spending as much on incarceration as on education. Okay. Under the regime of Proposition 184, incarceration will steadily pull ahead. Okay? Guaranteed. Well, we're talking about people, you know, the people on the other side, their unified vision, their scapegoating vision, scapegoating the people coming across the border, scapegoating the people that are not willing to provide an education to. We're talking about people whose mentality is this refined. Throw them in jail. Even though it costs less to give them an education, throw them in jail. This is the law enforcement approach to every social problem. This is crude. We are talking about people who are indeed coarse. And this is why, when Willie Brown was asked, what, you're going to debate 2 of them? 2 against 1 seems a little fair. Willie Brown answered, well, no, it's really 1 to 0. And of course, he was right. He was right. Although I don't think I would have been able to come up with it so quickly, boy. 1 to 0. Okay, now, check this out, all right? It is a law enforcement approach to every social problem. And they only notice a social problem when it has achieved the level of law enforcement. When people have taken out guns, when they're shooting one another, then they notice, oh, we have a problem. And at that point, what's the solution? Throw them in jail. This is, we are talking people with less than sophistication. And notice, it's a pattern, not just one proposition. A set of propositions, not just one candidate. A set of public figures. There's Newt, there's Phil Gramm, there's Jesse Helms, there's the person who has reinvented opportunism, namely our own Pete Wilson. There's a whole set of them, okay? That is one whole. And therefore, in order to be successful, we need to establish a counter pole. We need to establish an alternative vision in public to counter that vision. Every chance we have to debate them, we take. Quasi Harris and I are going to be at City College of San Francisco during the summer debating Custard, and we don't know who else. And there's a nice story attached to that. One of the organizers of that particular forum said to Custard, you know, you might try for a woman or a person of color. Silence. Silence. We don't know who the second person is going to be. Well, every chance we get, we need to engage. We need to be more coherent than they are, okay? We need to be clearer with not only the clarity of intelligence, but the clarity of moral commitment, so that there is no question at all, when the votes come, what people are voting for. People mustn't vote for that initiative thinking, it's for civil rights. People mustn't be permitted that luxury. And we are the ones who need to be sure they don't have that particular luxury. Now, with the objective of meeting this set of issues and this set of personalities by a counter set of issues By a unified vision, some of us decided we needed an organization that extended beyond one campus. And so while this is not about that, I do want to say, and I think it's reasonable to say, some of us have been organizing the campus coalitions for human rights and social justice. It's a real moniker, so I just call it the campus coalitions. We've already gotten to about a dozen campuses. We've had meetings involving representatives from those campuses. We need to go further. How many are there? The world does not begin and end in Berkeley, my friends. We turned out more people at Sonoma State than are sitting here, I have to tell you, and that's not an insult, it should be an incentive. Okay. There are 10 UC, only one UC Berkeley. There are 10 UC campuses. There are 20 CSU campuses. I teach at one of them. There are about 200 public community college campuses. That's where the folks are. We need to reach as many of those campuses as possible. We need to have movements on them, and from those places can go out those people who can talk to their parents, to their brothers, to their sisters, and get them to vote in a way that speaks intelligence and compassion, and therefore defeats the so-called civil rights initiative before we have to go back and be strong in the streets. And so it's really important, I feel, to extend that organization to as many of those campuses as possible, beginning now, continuing in the fall. I work from meeting to meeting. The first meeting was large, the second meeting was larger, but will we be here in the fall? It depends upon the workers on every single campus. And that, I want to be quite clear, this is not an elbowing people aside idea. On campuses where there are organized oppositions to these various initiatives from the right, those are the initiatives that we want to support. On campuses where they don't exist, we can help build them. We can help people do the things they would do naturally and help coordinate their efforts. I now would like to focus a little bit on the solution, as I see it. Thank you. The solution to the so-called affirmative action problem. Because there is a problem. The problem is we are right now in a mild depression. And it's going to go on for a long time. What happens under those circumstances? There is U.S. history. The labor history of the United States can be understood very clearly as a history of inter-ethnic conflict over too small a pie. There is only one way that I can see to move into the future without the white males fighting everybody else for king of the mountain. And that requires a great expansion of social investment in healthcare, education, employment. We are right now going in the opposite direction, and we are not starting from a good place. The United States has the steepest income and wealth gradient of any comparable country in the world, and instead of just telling it to you, don't believe me, it was an article printed in the Chronicle, reprinted from the New York Times, April 17. You can look it up. I suggest you do. The article was written by Keith Bradsher, reprinted from the New York Times, documenting it. We are the worst in that particular department. We have to become much, much better. We have to expand the pool of resources in healthcare, education, and jobs so that there is enough for everyone. We don't have to say, sorry, Pedro, it's either your kid or mine. No. We can have enough of all those things for everyone, provided we have a greatly expanded social investment budget. And where does it have to come from? Well, what are the rich for? You see, what is the excuse for rich people? There is, in fact, an excuse,
okay? The rationale for rich people is they invest our money wisely. Well, they're not investing it wisely. Pink slip time. Pink slip time. We have to do some of the investing ourselves. It's as simple as that. And if we expand that pool of resources, then we don't have to fight over the bones. That, as I see it, is the only solution available to us, and we've got to go for it. I would like to conclude by asking you, please, give money too. Write checks. And if you do that, please, if you write checks, for example, to campus coalitions for human rights and social justice, we will split the money so as to defray, in part, the cost of this undertaking today and also the expansion to other campuses. So, and we have very low overhead, I guarantee. Thank you very much.
Our last speaker, but definitely not the least, Professor Ron Takaki from Asian American Studies. He did have to teach and came back, and he has to be put a little later on the agenda, so it's not an indication of any slight disrespect, hopefully. So Professor Ron Takaki from Asian American Studies has been an outspoken on the issue of affirmative action and civil rights for quite some time, and it's a pleasure to have him here. Ron Takaki.
First of all, I'd like to say that I'm glad to see some familiar faces out there in the audience. The theme of this conference is Excellence in Diversity. And you know, like a professor, I started asking questions. What do we mean by excellence? And what do we mean by diversity? And how are the two related to one another? And I'd like to try to answer these questions by telling you a story. Some of my students know I like to tell stories in my lectures and also in my books. Well, in 1989, this faculty at Berkeley did something quite amazing. Some of you may have been there when we had that meeting across the plaza. We voted affirmatively to establish a multicultural requirement for graduation called the American Cultures Requirement. I can remember walking out of the vote, and students were there saying, right on, But, and now, this requirement has become like, a feather in the cap of the University of California at Berkeley. In fact, Michael Heyman, who was then our chancellor and who is now the secretary of the Smithsonian, proudly boasts that American Cultures Requirement is one of his shining achievements while he was chancellor here at Berkeley. And I laugh because he caved into the veterans recently, in terms of the Enola Gay exhibit controversy. But I have to make a confession. Initially, the Berkeley faculty did not want to approve the proposal for a requirement. And what happened was this. In 1987, for the first time in the history of this university, students of color totaled 52% of the undergraduate population. And we have a faculty that's 90% white. Imagine the faculty showing up on campus, fall of 1987, walking into their classrooms, looking out at their students, and saying, whoa, something's different here. Like affirmative action was working. It had diversified the student community here. And these students began to question us as faculty. They said, look, we're having trouble in the dormitories, we're having difficulties in the dining halls relating to one another. saying, educate us. They said, is this or is this not a university? He said, what do you mean? And they said, isn't a university supposed to be a place where you study the universe, the physical universe, and also the social universe? And look at this social universe. It's a racially, culturally diverse universe. Educate us. And the students came up with this idea of a requirement, a multicultural requirement for graduation. What did the faculty do? Well, you know, Berkeley faculty. They said no. Initially, they were very dismissive. They said, we know what you need to learn. You need to learn Western civilization. And the students said, fine, you know, teach us Shakespeare, teach us Melville. Western civilization is part of American society. But American society includes cultures from other parts of the world. You know, teach us about this reality called the United States of America. And the faculty said no. So what did the students do? Well, you know, Berkeley students, it all started with you, Mario, you know. They began to hold demonstrations and rallies on the steps of Sproul Hall, demanding that the faculty institute a requirement to make us multiculturally literate. Faculty said no. So you know what the Berkeley students did? They began to occupy buildings. And one of the buildings they occupied was the faculty club. You know, that elegant building, that rustic-looking building in that lovely clay, you know. And at that point, the movement was not a very large movement, you know. And I know it was not large because I was the faculty chair of this student faculty coalition. Okay. And like maybe only like 5, 6, maybe 11 students would show up at our meetings, and you know, we got depressed, of course, you know. But we decided that we were committed to the transformation of the university. And so the students decided to take the faculty club. And if you've ever been in this faculty club, and I think some of you have been in there, you know, it's an easy building to occupy because there's this narrow hallway leading to the sandwich lines. Okay? So the students, and there were only about 15 to maybe 25 of them who were prepared for what they call an action. Action. They were going to take faculty club, they were going to clog that line. They were going to say to the faculty, you can't eat unless you educate us in all of our diversity. So about 10 minutes to 12, you know, the students went in there, about 15, 18 of them went in there, put their bodies across that hallway. And then faculty began to show up at 12 o'clock, and they had to literally walk over these bodies, okay? And some of them got angry. And one of them, a very conservative professor, I won't tell you from what department, started shouting at the students. He said, you can take your multicultural proposal and shove it up your... And he said it. Well, these students were taking good notes, you know. So anyway, the next day when the students found out, you know, about what had happened, the students got pretty upset. They said to the faculty, look, you can disagree with us intellectually, but do not insult us. Okay? And, you know, this exploded, became a burning issue on this campus. And many of you can still remember, you know, those huge meetings that we held. In fact, we held a meeting right here, and 2,000 people were there, you know. And Hatem got the message and realized that we needed to prepare this university in terms of its curriculum for the 21st century. A 2-year debate was launched, and finally in 1989, the American Cultures Requirement was established. Well, what lessons can we learn from this history? You know, now, don't say, you know, when you walk out of this room, Professor Takaki said we should take the faculty club. You know, yeah, I am just a historian, you know, according to what happened. But what lessons can we learn? Well, one lesson that I've learned from the students is that it doesn't take a whole lot of students to build a mass movement. You know? There were only, as I said, 6 to 8 of us that met, you know, about every 2 weeks to organize these demonstrations and these faculty and these takeovers. So I was not part of, you know, the planning of the takeovers, of course. just a faculty member. But it didn't take a whole lot of students, you know, like 15 of them took that back club. But what it is that it created media attention, okay? Media attention. And all of a sudden, like, the issue was raised, okay? If it's not in the Daily Gazette, it didn't happen, you see? If it's not on television, it didn't happen. So these students were media savvy. So, you know, a lesson that we can learn here is that it doesn't take a whole lot of us, but it takes some of us who are committed for an action. And this brings me, you know, to 3 questions that I'd like to ask. And, I'd like to ask, first of all, Angie Fa a question. Angie said that she's going to organize an effort to collect 1 million signatures to support affirmative action. I'm just wondering whether or not, you know, that would be simply a symbolic gesture. I wonder if we shouldn't use those signatures, actually, to initiate a counter proposition. A proposition that would make constitutional affirmative action. Why can't we have 2 propositions on the ballot? Let the people of California then decide, you know, which is the real civil rights proposition. Huh? I think we would waste it if we simply asked people to sign this petition. Unless it's connected to something that's going to happen at the ballot. And this brings me then to a question for Mario Savio. You know, Mario said, if we don't succeed at the ballot box, then we will be strong in the streets. And I'm just wondering, Mario, whether or not we have it backwards, you know. Whether or not we need to be strong in the streets before the ballot box so that we win at the ballot box. I think that's what we learned about the civil rights struggle, you know, with all those marches and so forth. You know, we had to be in the streets of Montgomery and Birmingham and so forth before the Congress passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And finally, I'd like to ask the students a question. This university has done an analysis, what they call a projection analysis of the composition of our student body if affirmative action were abolished. I told you what affirmative action did in 1987. You know, it brought the minority into the majority of our student population. So the university has done these projection analyses. What if this proposition passes? What will be the impact in terms of the ethnic composition of the UC student body? They project that if this proposition passes, 97% of the Berkeley student body will be Asian and white. 3% will be African American and Latino. And the question I want to ask the students is this. Is that the kind of university you want? Is that the kind of university the people of California really want? Now let me say this. That's not the kind of university I want to be teaching at. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have some time for questions. If anybody would like to take questions. So I would say that Mario and Angie, if you want to answer to that question, and then we'll open it to the floor. You could come up to the microphone and ask the question to any member of the panel.
I'd actually like to respond to that in the following way, that part of organizing people to vote their real interests is making a real public splash. That is, in other words, a real identifiable alternative. And so if that's what we mean by being in the streets before the election, very well and good. We don't want to freak them out. That's exactly what the other side wants to have happen. That's exactly what the other side is hoping for. We actually want to encourage people to vote intelligently, which is not what they did the last time. I was referring instead to what, unfortunately, might well happen if the thing passes. If the thing passes, then we are, in a sense, back to square one. And then it's not just a question of making a public appearance in the streets. It's a question of, once again, investing the institutions that are not hiring the people that they should be hiring, for example, or not admitting the people they should be admitting. And that's the kind of struggle which may be necessary, and that's what I had in mind. I certainly was not suggesting that one would very quietly encourage people to vote their interests. We have to be very, very public so that people know that there is an alternative vision in this society. So there's really no disagreement, I think.
Ron, that's a very important question, and I myself go back and forth on this. The coalition of organizations which are going to be doing the campaign have examined whether or not if you do an official initiative gathering effort or whether you do something that's symbolic. I guess the fundamental problem that I have, though, with a statewide initiative is twofold. One is that my rights, I don't feel comfortable putting them up for a vote statewide and say that whether or not it's something that a majority of Californians want to give me is something or not I should have. It's especially pressing because the Democrats, in order to win statewide in the presidential election, are actually considering doing that. They're considering taking my right to reproductive freedom. And they're thinking, well, let's make an initiative out of this. Now, they aren't thinking, let's do it in order to guarantee me my rights. I could actually lose my rights in that effort. The reason why they're thinking about making reproductive rights an initiative is that it would get out the kind of voters that they want to bring out. And so philosophically, I'm uncertain about how I feel about putting my rights out to a vote in the initiative process. And as we all know, the initiative process in California has more often than not been used to deny people things than it has been to give them certain things. What I mean by this is the initiative process has been the process by which things like fair housing laws have been challenged. It's the process by which alien land laws have been passed that prevented people of color from owning land. There are all kinds of very negative things that the electorate have voted through the initiative process. And I'm not certain that I want my rights up for a vote. What I do want to make sure is that we have a vehicle for going out and talking with every person about taking a stand in support of affirmative action. And I want to make sure that we have a big enough showing for affirmative action and for our side, and that we build a strong enough organization that we can win the initiative for affirmative action, and we can go on and win the next 6 initiatives, whatever they be for, and we can use that same infrastructure to go on and build support for workers' rights, for peace and justice, and building the kind of society that we want. On a totally pragmatic level, I also want to say that it's substantially harder to vote, get a yes vote on an initiative than it is a no vote. There's a certain percentage of the electorate, and you have to factor it in, that votes no on all the ballot initiatives. They're so fed up with everything that's on there, they go through and check off no. And so you have to start off, in order to win an initiative, with thinking that you are going into it with about 75% or more, I think, of the electorate that is going to be for you, because you're going to lose a certain amount. And according to the polling data right now, I'm scared in terms of where we are. I think that we can defeat an initiative. I am not convinced that in the time that we've got, I know that in our lifetimes, we're going to be able to build the kind of momentum we need to so that we've got a 75% public majority in support of affirmative action and civil rights. But I don't think that it's going to be here with us in the short time between now and either March or November of '96. And I don't want to put my rights up for a vote and be part of the state constitution where it's very, very difficult to amend except through another initiative process or through Congress.
I really support Ron Takaki's recommendations on both of them. And simply because if we don't have a second initiative there, then we're dealing with one and we're trying to have the same argument. Having a second one is going to force people to say, well, what's the difference between this and this other one? And I think it has to be very clear that even though they call it Civil Rights Initiative, it's anti-Civil Rights Initiative, and that would be the reason why we have to have a second one. So at all sides you have very clearly two groups with different opinions, regardless of what you call it, but it does force a lot of discussion in the news media, even if nothing else, just to try to clarify the difference between the two initiatives. I agree with Angie's comment. I wish that we wouldn't have to go that approach. But I think if we don't have a second one, then we are arguing in their turf, their questions, and a lot of people don't listen to a lot of that information. The second one, going to the streets, I don't see how else they're going to take us seriously, because as far as I'm concerned, we're going to win this war. There's no question about it. The issue is when and how much it's going to cost. But we don't have affirmative action because somebody wanted to give it to us. Affirmative action was won piece by piece, and simply because they found that they had to make changes. And so even if they take it away from us, we will have affirmative action. You may call it something differently. The issue is it's going to take 2 years, 3 years, and how much it's going to cost before people realize that the solution to our problem means that we have to have our kids employed, meaningful employment. They have to go to school. We have to get them out of the streets, and that's what affirmative action is trying to achieve.
My name is Don Nicodemus, and I've been working on an initiative to democratize the an initiative that would diversify the leadership of this institution. Currently, the Constitution calls for a diverse board of regents, diverse by race, by sex, by class. Okay, but how it's instituted, there's no language that institutes it in the Constitution. So the governor can get away with appointing his buddies who give him money. So we have to change that. But maybe what we tried to get this on the ballot for '94, and we thought that because of the abuses that we've seen in the executive, that we would be able to succeed. But in talking to some of the folks when we were down at the I was down at the Students Association conference at UCLA. We were talking about affirmative action. The consensus there was that yes, we have to go on the offensive. We have to accomplish something. We have to restructure these institutions. Now maybe what we did last time wasn't enough. Maybe we're not really going after a big enough part of what we want to change. Maybe we have to talk about providing more resources to all of higher education. But does it really have to be something where we're saying we need to diversify the faculty of this institution, we need to diversify the leadership of this institution? Does that have to be a question of our rights? I mean, are we backing off of something if we don't go for this, if we don't put a positive message forward? So I'd like to ask the panel if they support this kind of initiative. I'd like to ask each one of them, besides the ones that we've heard, maybe in addition, if there's any reconsideration, if there's some kind of support for a positive initiative that will provide greater diversity and greater opportunity for everyone.
Angie made, I think, some important points strategically about the difficulty with the initiative process that I think people need to hear. Because I think it's easier for people who've never been involved at that level of politics to say, oh, let's do this, let's do that, but they've never really been out there trying to collect signatures. Okay, that is hard work. And so anybody who's serious, it's one thing, if you want to do it symbolically, pretend you've been doing something, that's one thing. If you want to win, then you got to know that it takes money, it takes lots of people. Now, I actually think the alternative idea is a good one, because I think it might help, but I recognize, I think, I listen to Angie, I know it would be very difficult. I think you're right in principle that we should be talking about how to expand opportunity, how to really talk about restructuring this university to increase it, because one of the problems in this is that people don't realize that affirmative action actually done very little. I mean, we have this incredibly diverse undergraduate population. I feel good about that. But if you look at our faculty, if you look at the way this university, for example, has used, it's what they call target of opportunity positions, or XOP positions, which were supposed to be created to bring greater diversity in the faculty. Most of those positions have gone to the spouses of faculty, most of whom are not people of color. So there's a real need to look at ways to expand opportunity, to restructure, to go beyond just affirmative action. Problem is a strategic one. What can we do at this point now to win, to fight against this attack? I regret the fact that we're in this defensive position, but that's what we are, because Ed is right. We won this in the context of a movement. We didn't win this out of charity. We didn't win this out of a sense, oh wow, we've been discriminated, we need to do something else now. Let's change, we have a change of heart. That's not why we won this. They gave up affirmative action under duress. Okay, they want to do that. All right? And now they're recognizing that maybe the time is right to take it back away. So we got to fight to retain it, but then we do need to take the next step, which is to talk about how to expand opportunity, how to address this problem of the widening gap in income. I mean, we got a whole bunch of things to deal with. And hopefully, what I'm hoping is that if we are successful in how we organize this campaign, what we begin to do is to build a new majority coalition that is willing to embrace the diversity of this state, to address the larger issue, which I think that Bettinas spoke to, which is really beneath the surface, which is really what this is all about. The fact that we are changing as a society, and many people are afraid of that change. And others are willing to embrace it. And we need to give those who are willing to embrace it some support and say it's okay to be out front and saying that this change needs to happen and make it go forward. Unfortunately, right now, I think we're in a defensive mode, though. And we need to get beyond that, but I think that's realistically where we're at right now.
Yeah, I worked on the Rainbow Coalition and the Sane Alternatives Coalition, which was formed by Keith Carson, the Alameda County Supervisor, and the National People's Campaign, which is in San Francisco. And, you know, we're doing something at 29th Laney College. We've got May 6th. A lot of people know about all this. But I see a low turnout here. Students are going to classes, coming and going. But, you know, people shouldn't feel discouraged about this because this is just, I think, just the beginning. And that there are many, many, many things going on. I'm going to many large numbers of meetings, and there are large numbers of people that are turning out that are supporting affirmative action, that are fighting against these cutbacks. And so we really need to be encouraged that, you know, things are happening. So I know a lot of people might be sitting around and thinking, wow, where's everybody at?
Do you have a question?
It's happening. It's pardon.
Do you have a question?
Oh, I'm sorry. I just wanted to bring that out. You know, so people know what's
Can we take the last two questions because we're running out of time for this session?
Okay, I'll make my question very short. Right now, in the campaign that's being mounted by the opponent of affirmative action, the affirmative action as a policy has been redefined as encouraging race and gender preferences. I just wonder that based on the simple ways in which the electorate tends to understand issues in this society, would you guys consider changing the name affirmative action or redefining it? I mean, or creating a phrase, a very simple phrase that for the majority, I mean, not everybody can follow all of the intellectual points that we've been given here today. Not everybody is listening. Given that, would you consider creating a phraseology or a new name that actually reflects the ideals or the real meaning of affirmative action so that the ordinary people out there can just go along with that? Affirmative action is positive. Create a name or a phraseology that reflects all the positive things about it. It's a very simple suggestion.
I think actually there is a group which is trying to organize a counter initiative. The group is, from what I understand from reading in the press, a group of Black conservative Republicans. And they seem to have chosen a positive name for their initiative, something like the Opportunity for All Initiative, Expanded Opportunities Initiative, or something of this kind. I haven't seen the initiative, though, and I'd like to see what it is. I like to second what a number of people have said. It would be good to have, I think, a counter initiative with a positive thrust, but it is not an easy thing to do, and we have to think really carefully about that sort of thing. But as far as name is concerned, I have to tell you, the name affirmative action seems very positive to me. And I worry about, I mean, to me this seems, I think the government has such a role to take affirmative action to right so many centuries of wrong. Unfortunately, no words we take are immune from twisting. That's what they've done with the California Civil Rights Initiative. That's precisely it. So I'm not sure that we can win it back, okay? I'm not sure that we can find words that they can't twist because that's the name of their game. So I don't know if we can win that way, okay? It's a thought.
Before affirmative action, we did have another name, and it was equal opportunities. And everywhere you went, all the employers were an equal opportunity employers, all the universities. We had to change that because even though everybody said the words, affirmative action made it very clear that it's not enough to say that you're an equal opportunity employer or something like that. You had to take some very specific action. That's why it was called affirmative action. Now, what people need to be aware of is that everybody gained from it. It's not just minorities. White males gain more than anybody else. And the reason that I say that is because we know that white women gain more than anybody else, but who do they marry? And what kind of children do these people that marry white males have? So white males now have wives and spouses and so forth. They have gained much from it. Their children are doing very well. But in addition to that, before affirmative action, and that was before affirmative action at the university, we used to hire people by referral. When you had the term the Old Boys Network, they had a meeting. It meant that somebody called you and said, hey, by the way, my son is going to be here for the summer. Can you hire him? You hired him. Now, affirmative action has made it almost impossible to get hired without a job description being very clear. That has to be clear with the position. It has to go through a whole process, an advisory committee. This made it possible for white males that did not belong to the Old Boys Network to get in the process. And I think these people forget that there's a long history and that it has favored everybody, not just people of color. And I think the problem is that when we talk about news bites, you have to say everything in 2 words or 3 words, and there's no way you can explain affirmative action in 3 words.
If the panel would like to take more questions, we can keep going. Yeah.
I was thinking go to the microphone.
There's a microphone up in the front.
What is your view or take on class-based affirmative action?
I'd like to respond to that. I think it's important, but only part. That is, I think it's a proper idea, but only part of the solution. And the reason is, in my opinion, race and gender are independent variables. It is not the case that if we split up a limited pie and did it only on the basis of class, that we actually would see the kind of diversity that I think we want to see. It really is the case that gender and race have an independent history and an independent current activity. And one could easily imagine if one went exclusively to class-based affirmative action, that the pie could further shrink. And then you would have, the kind of unity which the other side is trying to achieve, namely a unity on the basis precisely of race and gender. No problem at all. We're letting all of these poor people in. They all happen to be white. So I don't think that we can do that. That is, we ought to do that, but we ought not at the same time to give up the need actually affirmatively to seek diversity by race and gender also.
I just wanted to ask about specific mechanics of campaigning. In particular, how does this campaign reach into the community, into neighborhoods, into labor unions, into churches, in such a way that these communities will become more solid and demonstrate more solidarity? Because one of our big problems in society is that people don't talk to each other very much, and since they're atomized and don't talk to each other, they get all their information from the television, which means they get all their information from money and from the vested interests. How, therefore, does a progressive campaign act to get, to create permanent communities which will act in their own interest?
Anyone would like to take a shot at that? Maybe Andy, before you leave?
I don't know about you, but I don't want to keep having to do this time and time and time again. And part of the motivation behind the individuals and organizations who are trying to put together the campaign for the 1 million signatures is that we would like to create an infrastructure that will be in place so that we don't have to keep reinventing the wheel. A lot of us have the experience of Proposition 187 of trying in August to do by November what might have been possible had we had another year, or it was possible for us in San Francisco. But in Los Angeles, which is where the bulk of the voters are, it's going to take much longer in order to build that base. But once that base is built, you're right, it's going to be important that it be that these issues, not just this time for affirmative action, but next time for workers' rights, or next time for peace and justice, or getting us out of whatever mess our next president and legislatures get us into, that we've got organization. What the right wing did in this country in the 1970s and the 80s is something I wish they hadn't done. And it's a lesson I wish we had learned. We basically, after the 60s, let our organizations go to the ground. They turned into shells after the 1960s. They shrunk down. I remember being in Mississippi in 1980 and being amazed at how little was left after the civil rights movement in Mississippi in the 1960s. The same thing goes for Washington, D.C. and California and any other place. It's very important this time that we do what, unfortunately, the right wing has done, that we keep our institutions and our networks alive, and that we build them strong enough to last for our entire lifetimes.
I would take the last comment.
I'd like to add something to that, we need to get our own ducks in a row, which means the campuses. If we bring shell organizations to coalitions with organizations off the campuses, then we're not that strong. And I don't mean, and I stress again, as I said before, by the campuses I don't mean one campus or two. There are 200 some odd community college campuses. That is where children of the working class go. That is where we need to organize. If we build out to those campuses, then you have a direct link to the community. And so the best thing from the campuses that we can do is to get them all organized, not just the elite ones. That is a big task. You say, but why are you looking at such a small, why are you setting your sights so low? I'm not setting my sights low. That's a very big task, and that task will automatically link up to the community, because that's where the kids of working families are to be found in very large numbers.
Thank you. I would like at this time to conclude this panel. You may come up and speak with any of the panelists and ask them personal question. Thank you very much all for being here and participating, and hopefully we'll see people back here for the workshops where you could have more discussion one-on-one. Thank you very much.